The Selling the Military report examines contemporary British Armed Forces marketing campaigns. It looks at the narrative that they create and how they work to draw in young people. It's a joint project between Forces Watch and Medact. Medact is a public health charity. And it also draws on perspectives from academics, from veterans, and from a short survey that we did with young people. So we begin the report by looking at the context for military recruitment and why recruitment messaging is now far more individualised than it once was, say, 50 years ago. There's a much publicised recruitment shortfall faced by the military, and we look at the complex social, demographic and policy reasons why this is occurring and the ways in which the military is trying to deal with it, and some of the flaws we think are found in these methods that they're using. And we also consider how adolescents and young people in particular relate to marketing and can be more vulnerable to it, and how various well-being risks associated with military training and service particularly impact on the young people who are drawn in, who are targeted by military recruitment marketing. Particularly when they have perhaps adverse childhood experiences in their backgrounds, which could be because they come from more socio-economically disadvantaged areas. The report then looks in more detail at the mechanics of military marketing campaigns and the branding and the messaging that they've developed, referring to a current campaign for each of the armed forces, for each of the services. We raise concerns about how the military recruitment marketing might be impacting on the well-being of recruits, particularly given certain differences between the image that they give and the reality that young people might then face, as well as on the relationship of wider society to the military, such as on perceptions of military force. And then the report concludes by considering how the strategic targeting of adolescents intersects with an increasing awareness that we now have of the importance of regulation and caution when marketing specifically to children and young people, especially when you're marketing something that has particular ethical and health considerations. And we think that given the unique risks and well-being considerations of an armed forces career, particularly for those youngest targeted recruits, military marketing should be viewed with the same careful, critical perspective. So firstly, let's take a look at who military marketing campaigns target. The key target audience, particularly for the Army and for the Navy, is low-income adolescents, and that's using the extended definition of adolescence as reaching into the early 20s. And their gatekeepers, where gatekeepers refers to people who perhaps are in a position of authority and can direct or influence adolescents in a particular way. So for example, the target audience of This Is Belonging, which is a recent Army marketing campaign, is described in their marketing briefing as aged between 16 and 24 from households with an average income of £10,000. And it specifically refers to C2DE, which is marketing speak for the lowest socioeconomic groups. So for example, covering those in skilled, semi-skilled and unskilled manual occupation, as well as the unemployed. We've also looked at the list that the Army have of their target cities for recruitment, and we've mapped them against multiple deprivation indicators. And we found that all of the cities that they target, most of them have relatively high levels of deprivation by far. The Army's target audience is also more personally described as being ambitious and money-driven, but not good at money management. They describe them as having a thirst for a variety of risk and being likely to be influenced by those around them. And the target audience for Made in the Royal Navy, which is the ongoing Navy recruitment campaign, is similarly described as 16 to 24, easily influenced, with the campaign targeting specific areas around the UK. Moving on to how the military goes about selling itself to targeted recruits. So today the channels that they're using are increasingly sophisticated and diverse, and they include social media platforms, other digital sites, TV and radio, search engine advertising, music and video streaming services, and more. And all of these channels are connected and synchronized, and they're data-driven. And since January this year, we've seen how good the Army is at rolling out sequential phases of their recruitment marketing campaigns. And the costs of them are high, so total spend on marketing across all three services every year is roughly £27 million. And then meanwhile, you also have more traditional channels which are being used to speak particularly to those gatekeepers. That could include TV and radio. And there's also non-digital channels used to promote the military to young people. So, for example, in schools, through youth activities, and in public spaces and community events. We then talk about the specific impacts of recruitment marketing. So research shows the particular impact of and importance of marketing in general on generating an interest in an armed forces career. So while many who enlist have had a long-term interest, perhaps they have family or friends who've served, a third of recruits say that they learned about the armed forces through advertising, and 42% have highlighted the internet and websites, which obviously carry associated marketing content. So it is a really significant thing in influencing young people in particular to think about joining the military. But we also argue that while these sophisticated and heavily resourced campaigns do generate high levels of interest in applications, this hasn't necessarily been translating, for various reasons, into enough numbers to stem the recruitment shortfall. So there's actually been a huge disparity between the number of applications and the number of entrants, with large numbers dropping out the application process, and then many others who do make it to enlistment drop out during training, perhaps because there is this disparity between the lived reality and what they were sold. And so this leads to a particular concern that suggests greater regulation and caution might be needed, because not only is there this stark disparity felt by recruits, and I'm going to talk a bit more about that, but also many of them go so far as to actually leave early or during training or even during the application process, and that could have various impacts on young people. So for example, they could have disengaged from education because they were focusing on wanting to join the military. They could have deferred going into college because they were going through the application process and they were hoping that they were going to enlist. And others who go further down the line actually leave mainstream education to join up, and then perhaps they drop out during the training, which could leave them in a very critical time as 16 to 18-year-olds in their education and development, disadvantaged behind their peers in the education system or needing to find other employment while lacking qualifications. And there are also significant short and long-term health risks related to joining the military, which become more pronounced for those who are vulnerable because of their age or because they've experienced childhood adversity. And the report goes into that in some detail. And it's important to mention that we don't deploy young people until they turn 18, but the risks that we're talking about, some of them relate to training itself, and some of them are long-term impacts related to actually channeling those young people who are less qualified than the adults who are going in into the highest risk roles in the military. So 5 themes and areas of concern are identified particularly in the report. Firstly, that military marketing campaigns portray armed forces life as superior to civilian life. So for example, it's the only place where you can escape from things that are holding you back, whether that's lack of opportunity or whether it's discrimination. And you can see quite a few examples of that when you're watching the campaign. So for example, there's in 2018, one of the army marketing campaigns they were all animations, and they focused on how the military is a really welcoming place. You won't be bullied, you'll be welcomed no matter what your background is. And it was really trying to debunk some of the negative opinions people might have of the military. But as I'll talk a bit more about, there's a real difference between saying that in your advertising campaign and actually having that welcoming, inclusive environment as the reality for young people when they join. So 5 themes and areas of concern are identified in the report. Firstly, that armed forces life is portrayed as superior to civilian life. So for example, it's the only place where you can escape from lack of opportunity or indeed from discrimination. And secondly, there are facts about life in the armed forces that are fundamentally misrepresented or glossed over in the campaigns. So for example, military life is presented as this kind of ultimately fulfilling, amazing career path, but we have data on levels of satisfaction among personnel, and that tells a very different story. So for example, roughly half of recruits don't feel like they had an accurate picture of life in the military before they enlisted. 4 in 10 of non-officers are satisfied with services life in general, so that's quite low, and would recommend it to others. And only 36% of personnel across the services feel that their own morale is high, and even less, 7% feel the morale of the services is high. And meanwhile, while the military is sold to young people as this solid career, in fact it can be very short. So each year more people are leaving than are joining, and often before finishing training or after 4 years of service, which is the earliest at which most personnel can leave. So the military suggests to young people that they will get these amazing transferable skills and qualifications that will help them when they eventually leave the forces. And while there will be many recruits who do fare well in the forces and afterwards, it is misleading to place so much emphasis on the armed forces as a vehicle for social mobility, given that working age veterans are twice as likely to be unemployed as working age civilians, and given that many veterans do actually complain of a lack of transferable skills when they leave the forces.
Said my first word at 1. Kicked off the stabilisers at 4. United mad by 7. Bored at 11. First black iron girlfriend at 14. I left school at 16. Broke my arm, broke the bank. 18, I worked nights in the castle. But then I stopped pulling pints and started pushing myself. I upped my game, made a leap. I learned to think on my feet and off them. I put my life in the hands of others and held their lives in mine. I left home, I wrote home, I found a new home. I did things I never dreamed I would, and overcame things I never thought I could. The elements, the distance, the fears, doubts, and all 7 continents. Sure, I was born in Carlisle, but I was made in the Royal Navy. Start your journey, search Made in the Royal Navy.
So you can see here how the Navy is being sold as a way out of dead-end, boring jobs and dissatisfaction into an exciting, fulfilling, invigorating career which is really going to make you as a person. But the reality is that only 17% of people who pursue an application into the Navy will actually finally enlist. And only 35%, which is actually the lowest across all of the services of other ranks, are satisfied with their services life in general. And only 38% would recommend joining the Navy to other people. So there is quite a disparity between the reality for people in the Navy and what is presented in videos like that. Thirdly, the campaign's attempt to various extents to present diversity and to represent the military as this inclusive, progressive space. But they manage actually in many cases, even while they're trying to do that, to reinforce stereotypes, while in fact the diversity that they show can be seen as tokenised, particularly given that the military have yet to sufficiently address really significant problems that they still have with equality. So, for example, the whole of the This Is Belonging 2018 campaign really emphasised diversity and inclusion in the army. But the reality is, which you wouldn't get across at all from these campaigns, is that there's still a really serious problem of toxic masculinity in the forces. So sexual harassment and bullying are still very serious issues, which women and black and minority ethnic personnel suffer from in particular. And there are serious systemic issues that the military still needs to address. So, for example, there's a legal charity called Liberty which recently published a report in which they slammed the military justice system. And one of the things that they talked about was the military's rape conviction rate, which is only at 4.2%, and that's compared to 32 to 46% in the civilian justice system. So there's some really serious problems with this idea that the campaign suggests, which is that women will be listened to in the army. That doesn't marry up with the actual statistics that we have. And also looking at 3 years of the Army's This Is Belonging campaign, there is a kind of real emphasis on stereotypical male bonding, which does actually dominate any attempts that they're making to represent diversity and inclusion. Although the Navy and the RAF campaigns do seem to be presenting more of an attempt to appeal to a range of audiences.
I grew up with brothers and I'd always played sports, but I still thought the army was dominated by men and it wasn't for me. I decided to get a normal job. Men at work would often talk over me. I felt like I didn't have a voice. So I decided to go for it and I joined the army. It was totally different. All that matters is you're good at your job. I recently commissioned as an officer and now I lead a team of 30 women and men. It feels good to finally have my voice heard.
Will I be listened to in the army? was an army recruitment video in 2018, which appeals in particular to women, and it suggests that they will be empowered in the military. And obviously there are problems with that, given what we know about sexual harassment in the military, given what we know about the rape conviction rate in the military justice system. There are lots of issues that you could draw out. But even within the actual video itself, there's a problem with how they are representing women. The woman is continually a very small figure. She is presented as powerless, whether it's in the civilian life where she is abused, she isn't listened to, or whether it's when she's rescued by the military, who pick her up in their giant man hands and then place her down on the floor. Throughout the entire thing, she is disempowered and small and vulnerable compared to all of the male figures in the video. And this is in the video where they're trying to present themselves as inclusive and an equal employer. So a fourth key concern that we draw out in the report is how the emphasis that military recruitment campaigns place on belonging in the military and finding this kind of close-knit family, friends for life, that you will have this sense of belonging that you would never be able to achieve anywhere else. We think that's problematic, one, because it plays on adolescent vulnerabilities, given what's going on for them developmentally, but also given that it masks real lived experiences of isolation in the armed forces community. The theme of finding where you belong is a particularly powerful one for adolescents, because they're going through the most intense phase of our social identity formation. So not only is it kind of playing on that specific developmental vulnerability, but there's also another side to this utopia of an amazing sense of belonging that you will find in the military. Of course, military training and culture is designed to ensure people form strong bonds with one another and to the institution. But in fact, there are nonetheless high levels of loneliness and isolation that are faced by the armed forces community, including by veterans. There was a recent survey done by the British Legion, which found that a quarter of respondents felt lonely or isolated always or often. And nearly 70% agreed that loneliness and isolation are serious problems within the armed forces community. And some examples of reasons for this include a lack of access to support services and to welfare services, and elements of armed forces culture, including a culture of sort of self-reliance and pride and avoidance of weakness, which obviously the military is trying to say in these campaigns that it's not like that anymore. The reality is that it still is like that for many people. And so this reality of potential problems with loneliness and isolation contrasts with the message that the military gives you friends and family and community and belonging for life. And it's also a key example of how targeting young people who may have childhood adversity in their background may damage their long-term well-being throughout their forces career and then when they transition into civilian life. Because without that stable family and community infrastructure, problems like loneliness and isolation and other well-being issues associated with the forces life will be heightened by, or may be heightened by, this lack of support that they have from home. And finally, but crucially, military recruitment marketing promotes fun, self-development and adventure in the context of war and armed conflict. And this is something that we try and go into to some detail in the report. There is this strong focus on personal development, the idea that you can be made as a person, you can be the best, and you will fulfill your potential through joining the military, as well as having fun, travelling and getting new experiences. And these messages are of course designed to resonate in particular with adolescents who may be facing adversity and low prospects, and who are also drawn to risk and adventure. And the adverts explicitly or implicitly use violence elsewhere in the world to promote self-development for people here in the UK, and we think there are serious ethical problems with that. Some of them go further, and images related to conflict are almost completely removed, and you would think that the advert is selling a holiday adventure. And others intertwine the guns and military scenes and shooting with fun and fast-paced scenes around things like partying, drinking with your friends, fitness and career achievements. So Explore the Wild, which is one of the RAF's recruitment videos, really does look like it's just selling an adventure holiday rather than a military career. And then a recent Army recruitment video called The Army Needs You and Your Stamina it looks at this young person who's clearly addicted to gaming, and in such a way that it is impacting on his ability to function in day-to-day life and on his relationships with his family. And it's obvious that his parents are quite concerned about it. And it says to this young person and to this young person's gatekeepers that if he joins the military, this won't be a problem anymore. It equates virtual conflict, which he obviously enjoys through gaming, with actual warfare. And it sells this message that this kind of problem that he has will be fixed. He'll be able to succeed in a real life world environment where he will have a career. And there is in fact a current focus on targeting young gamers that we're seeing in army recruitment marketing, which we think is one to really look out for going forward. Even the most recent army poster campaign, which is in fact an outlier in that it does actually look more at what the army is doing rather than looking at what young people will gain by joining the army, it presents the army wholly as a humanitarian organisation, ignoring completely what is, in its own words, a warfighting organisation. So whether it's done by shifting attention from the military itself to the benefits that it gives to the individual, or by whitewashing what the military is doing, this distortion is targeted towards vulnerable young people, and therefore it amounts to what philosophers are calling moral exploitation. There's a growing understanding around moral injury, which has yet to gain very much recognition in the UK, and this has led to a further discussion about moral exploitation. So moral exploitation is when a soldier's decision was heavily conditioned by the pronounced vulnerability, socio-economic, age-related, or myriad other factors. Then it's doubtful that a soldier was in a position to refuse the additional moral responsibility, moral risk, and potential blameworthiness thrust upon them by military service. We end the report by suggesting a new framework for assessing military recruitment campaigns. We suggest that they should be considered in light of the growing awareness that adolescence is an extended period of neurological development, which includes a window of vulnerability affecting behaviour and decision-making and responses to stress. The risks to well-being that are associated with military training and military service, which are heightened for those who are drawn in when they are younger and when they are most vulnerable, should also be considered, along with the recognised need for regulation and for oversight of sophisticated marketing strategies that target young people. Ultimately, we think that health and ethical criteria should be informing greater regulation of military recruitment marketing campaigns. The UN Committee on the Rights of the Child has actually for some years been pushing the UK to do more to safeguard children and young people around military recruitment. But the way in which military recruitment marketing works is in direct opposition to the recommendations that they've made. And this report details evidence for the strategic targeting of children from low-income families and from ethnic minorities, which the UNCRC has specifically said we shouldn't be doing. And in principle, we believe that the well-being of young people should take precedence over the recruitment needs of the armed forces. And the link between early recruitment, childhood adversity, and negative health outcomes needs to be recognised. We offer some specific recommendations: that the minimum age of military recruitment should be raised to 18, that critical perspectives on military recruitment campaigns should be encouraged and disseminated by educators and others who are in a position to guide young people, and that policymakers should recommend measures to ensure that military recruitment marketing is appropriate and is accountable to the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child.